Hi, I'm Tobias Lindholm, and this is no popcorn, just movies. The matters of hijackings was very relevant in the Danish medias. And then in 2007 and 2008, the first two Danish ships were hijacked. Because my father was a sailor, I've been looking for a story to tell on a boat. I mean, to put 8-10 guys on a ship and throw them out in the elements is a perfect arena for drama. And in the beginning, we were only on the boat with the hostages. But as you can imagine, there's not much drama and just sitting there waiting to somebody to free you up. I got phoned by a guy who didn't want to tell me his name, but he said, I know a lot about this, very much like James Bond. I want to meet you. And I met with him. And his name was Gary Porter, and he plays Connor Julian in the film. He's a real hostage negotiator, so that's what he does. He's been in this situation many times. So he could fill in a lot of stuff that I didn't know about in the negotiation room, and suddenly we discovered that the engine for the story, the thing that needed to keep this running, the poker game of life and death. I discovered that it actually were two hostages in the same situation, two different places on Earth, and one of my favorite films being Heat, I could kind of try to develop my own two-character story. I've been working with Pilou before on my first film, and who plays Nicollet in the film. So I knew I wanted him as a sailor. He had the right age and everything for it. When we came upon the idea of being in the negotiation room, you know, I had an idea that the CEO, the money men, would be the bad guys who didn't want to pay. And in my research, I realized that it wasn't like that. They actually wanted to pay. They're insured, so they can pay whatever. But they have responsibility for the sailors out there not to be hijacked again. And if they pay, as Connor says in the film, if you pay, they'll say, thank you, that was a deposit. So that poker game suddenly interested me, and that, you know, was a kind of a gift to say, okay, we can actually tell this story jumping between two worlds. Well, yes, they are non-professional actors, but they are all playing their real profession. So they're experts in their fields. In this case, the gifts of these guys, because they're not carrying their plot on the shoulders, I don't need to control them that much. And then they can instead bring realism into the picture. I control this process, so I don't want to flatter myself by talking about documentary. I respect documentary directors very much, and I believe that that is probably the finest way of telling stories. But what we do, we try to put as many elements of reality as possible in there. And very detailed example is the guns that the pirates are carrying. Is guns. There's no prop guns in Kenya where we shot the film. You cannot get any fake guns, so you need real guns. So we got these from the police in Mombasa, and it's guns that they took from real pirates. So this gun has been used for hijacking, and just to know that the actors to know that, for me as a director to know that, brings in realism, brings in reality. And the crew members that are acting as crew members in the film were hostages. So they knew everything about this. They could give us specific details about life as a hostage on that ship. That gave us a lot of gifts, a lot of scenes that I couldn't imagine. And I believe that reality always tells a much more clear story than fiction. The hijack itself never interested me. When I wrote it, I never wrote any sequence where they actually hijacked the ship. Basically what happened was a gut feeling, and I tried to figure out how I could feel it with Søren for two reasons. If I wanted to make him a main character, I needed to be in the situation with him. If I, as an audience, knew more than him from the beginning, I would kind of look at him as a spectator instead of a main character. And at the same time, the situation with most desperation for me was just him being in another meeting. A guy coming in saying, oh, you have to take a look at this, and suddenly you're not any longer a businessman bringing stuff around the world in big boxes. You're suddenly a guy who has to play poker over life and death. And that change was for me most exciting to do with him in the picture, instead of something where you saw a speedboat coming around, and then it wasn't that type of film. So I never wrote it, and it didn't really interest me. Just before I write the final draft, I will get everybody together, the DOP, the editor, everybody, and we will say now, speak up now or be silent forever, right? And after that, I would change the script. And they never got a shooting draft, a complete shooting draft, none of them. Søren only got the scenes that he was in Denmark, and Pilou only got the scenes from the ship. So they didn't know exactly what was going on. And then we would make the phone calls live. I knew that making a film with 11 phone calls, at least in the script, we needed to make those phone calls extraordinary. So we would make them live. On the satellite phone from the ship, I would get Pilou to call Søren in Denmark. So he would be on his cell phone in his kitchen, probably in his underwear, drinking coffee, and suddenly his phone would ring, and Pilou would lead the conversation, and all the echoes, all the mistakes, all of that is real. That was how it sounded, and you can feel that in the actors because they don't need to act confused. They are like a little confused. They can't hear each other, and they didn't know exactly what scene we were doing. So Søren knew all the scenes very well, but he wasn't sure if it was the first one or the second one. So when Pilou called him and said something, he needed to find out, is this the scene where I hang up, or is this the scene where I... And in that way they improvised a lot in the phone calls to make them as real as possible. Well, Pilou is a very brave man. He's a guy who goes all in when he says yes to a job. So he would gain 20 kilos for the part. So he would be... One time with the first film we did, we were in Rotterdam at a film festival, and I remember we talked about only believing, or only having trust in fat cooks, because then they like to eat. And he remembered that right away, so he started to eat. And his wife hated me because she married a movie star, and now suddenly she had this big fat guy as a husband. So he would eat like 2 pizzas every morning and drink 5 liters of chocolate milk, and gaining 20 kilos in no time. And then when we got to Africa, he stopped eating. He only had like 100 grams of chicken and a cucumber every day, and that was it, and a little water. So he actually lost all the pounds during the production. So we would lock up the actors for 3 or 4 hours before starting to shoot. They never knew exactly when we would start to shoot. So I would lock them up in the cabin. So it was hot in there, and I didn't allow them to use the toilet and all of that. So they didn't need to act desperately. They didn't need to act that they wanted to get out. They didn't need to act that they were hot. It was already there, so they could spend their energy on the rest of the stuff. In Northern Europe, we have a tradition of social realism, which is kind of a political statement, often portraying people on bottom of society. It's always stories with a political angle to it. And I'm not interested in social realism. I'm almost more interested in naturalism, to get the actors and everything so real that the audience won't recognize the difference between the world they're living in themselves and the world of this film. And that's a hard thing to do, of course, because there's so many things you can't do when you want to follow that 100%. But right now, I think that we want to continue doing that. I'm not on my way to Hollywood. I'm making movies with my best friends and making a decent living of it. So I'm traveling. I'm right here. I mean, the film is going to be shown in France. I've seen too many European directors burning time off in Hollywood, not gaining anything from it. So I'm not in that queue. I think I'm going to stay with Pilou and Magnus and Adam and the rest of the rock band, and doing that for a while. And then, you know, let's see. I'm a screenwriter, and basically I see myself as a screenwriter once in a while directing a film. That was terrible. It was probably the worst decision I ever did. We thought that the monsoon season would be over when we got out, but it wasn't. So the waves were so high, and the African actors and armed guards and all of those guys hadn't been sailing before, so there was like puke all over the place. And it was a small boat, and we needed to shoot to keep on schedule. So for the first 3 or 4 days, it was just hell. And I was like, what the fuck have we done, man? We should have just done this in a studio, or at least in some calm waters in Northern Europe. The ship was prepared so that we could film all over the place, all the way around, all the time. And that, of course, made it very easy, because we didn't need to move lamps and production gear and all that. It was designed so that we could just keep on rolling. We sailed out into the Indian Ocean, and there's pirates out there, so everybody was a little scared in the beginning. And we had the armed guards out there, and I saw some activities once in a while with those guys suddenly aiming their guns at something I couldn't see what it was, and I tried to just focus on the monitor and not think too much about it. I was challenged, and the actors was challenged in a way that we would focus even more on the work, you know. I couldn't imagine doing it and then being able to go home to my flat screen and my 3 kids, having a decent meal, and then going back the next day and trying to create hell. I mean, it made sense to stay in hell. When we decided to rent a ship in Mombasa, we just went out to the streets of Mombasa and we found Somali kids in the street. And we went out to the Somali community outside Mombasa to negotiate with the clan leaders about how much they should get paid and if we could tell this story. And I was afraid that the clan leaders would say, don't tell a story like this because it makes Somali people look bad. So I had prepared a romantic version of the film to pitch to that meeting. But I discovered that they said to me, please tell the truth. We're losing our young guys to this. They think that they're going to get rich, so everybody's leaving Mombasa now, leaving their small shops, their kids, their families, to go and become pirates because they believe they're going to be millionaires of it. So they wanted me to tell the truth, and quite fast they just said, well, take all the boys you need and do the film. I didn't speak Somali, so I was afraid about what they were talking about on the boat, you know. They knew the story. Huh?
A negotiator?
He's from Denmark. It's the only guy we brought from Denmark. I saw him on the street and he's the only fat Somali guy I ever saw. So I just ran after him and asked him to come to a casting. And he came. He filmed very well and I asked him to strip down and threatened to kill me. And I thought, well, if he is naked and threatens to kill me and I still get scared, then he's good. And I got so terrified with him. He was really good, right? After meeting him, I would make his part bigger. So I would rewrite the script and give him a much more complicated story to tell because he could. He seemed like a capacity. And of course it was fantastic to bring him down because he would relate to the Somali guy. So we had a guy, an insider in that crowd who could tell us if something was wrong, if anything didn't work. I'm proudly on the shoulders of the Dogma brothers, of course. They have a great influence on my generation. John Cassavetes is a great inspiration. And the guys who inspired both Dogma and Cassavetes, Godard and the whole new wave from here, means a lot. And I studied that in film school. At the same time, I stopped watching features for a while and only watching documentaries, because the way that real people express themselves is never as clear as written characters. And I would love to be so good that I could at a time write a dialogue that seemed so real that you wouldn't know the difference whether it was improvised or written.